Hello, welcome to Hazel Jane Tarot, or welcome back. Today I'm doing something slightly different. Today I am bringing you my top 5 books of 2020 with a couple of honourable mentions at the end. So you will find a tarot book in there, but there is a range of other fiction and non-fiction titles that were my top 5 books of the year. The first book I want to talk about is My Place by Sally Morgan. So one of the goals I set myself this year was, as I might have mentioned if you watched some of my tarot videos, top 5 videos, I was talking about how this was supposed to be a depth year for me. And one of the parts of my depth year was I made a list of all the books that I had in my house that I hadn't read, and I was going to try to work my way through all of those titles in the year. Now I haven't managed to read all of them. There were about 40 books that I hadn't read. I've read I think 33 books this year so far, but some of those were new purchases. But mainly I read the books that I'd wanted to get through for the depth year. This book is one of the books I'd had for quite a long time. I think I've had this book for about 10 years. I bought it when I was living in Australia, and I had read like an excerpt or an abridged version of this that someone had loaned me while I was living in Australia, and I had really enjoyed that. But because I'd read that, I sort of didn't have the urgency to read the full book, and this had sat on a shelf for years. And I finally got around to reading it this year, and by complete coincidence, Katie Flowers has also mentioned this as one of her top reads of 2020, I believe. And I hadn't read this because Katie had recommended it, but it was just a coincidence that I had happened to read it this year too. But it is I would also recommend this book very highly, and I know Katie Flowers had recommended this very highly too. So this book, My Place, is written by an Aboriginal Australian woman who grew up in, I believe, the sort of 50s and 60s in Western Australia, and didn't know initially that she was from an Aboriginal family. And her mother and grandmother had kept their family history a secret, and the reasons for that become clear as you read through the story. But there's a lot of fear of the authorities and fear of persecution and racist treatment that is based on the traumatic and real lived experience of her family through the generations. And then Sally, as she gets older, starts to understand more about and try to investigate more about her family and where they've come from and who their people are, and where her grandmother and her mother grew up and so on. And it's just an incredibly moving personal investigation into her family history, but in the process of being like a kind of first person own voice story of Aboriginal person's lived experience. It gives you as an outsider, as a person even from another country, it gives an insight, like a really close insight into what it's like to have lived that life. And it's incredibly moving. It's incredibly enraging to read about the treatment of Aboriginal people through the generations. And it's just, it's just recommended reading. The way the story is structured, it goes through the first part of the story is kind of Sally's story as she is kind of growing up, and the clues that she picks up through her childhood about, the silences around her family history, and that sort of explores that. And then the last part of the book is the actual first person stories of Arthur Coruna, who I think is her great uncle, Gladys Coruna, who's her mother, and then Daisy Coruna, finally her grandmother. And I mean, I cried many times reading this book. It is, and laughed as well. Like, I mean, there's wonderful anecdotes, and it's very moving, very entertaining. It's just a wonderful story, and one of my favorite ways to access kind of stories of other cultures or other times, rather than reading sort of a dry academic textbook, like a first person biographical story like this, sort of, it really it really brings it to life and really helps you to feel and understand a bit of what that life is like. So this is just a wonderful book, and this is an illustrated edition, so it's wonderful. It has Sally's illustrations in it, and it also at the back has a family album with photographs of Sally's family. And I mean, it's just, I was constantly flicking back and forward to really to look at these images, to gaze at the pictures of her grandmother and her mother, and you really feel like you're getting to know these people as you read the book. So wonderful, top recommended read of 2020. My Place by Sally Morgan. So that was non-fiction, and actually 3 of my top 5 reads of 2020 were non-fiction. Another non-fiction book I really enjoyed was Megan Watterson's Mary Magdalene Revealed, and this is a book that I probably will read again. This is a book that I think you particularly enjoy if you come from a Christian background and have been frustrated by the sort of patriarchal nature of Christianity, and particularly in, like, say for example within the Catholic Church, with all the church leadership being male and so on. This book approaches Christianity through the lens of sort of the sacred feminine, and particularly expanding the role and significance of Mary Magdalene, and it inserts quotations from things like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and other sort of Gnostic scriptures, and explores them in quite a lot of detail. But it's all sort of tied against the spine of the story is Megan Watterson's personal and sort of physical journey to France to visit sites that are associated with Mary Magdalene in France. So I find this very powerful. It really spoke to where I'm at the moment. And it prompted me to go and buy the New Testament, which she refers to in this book, which has re-edited the New Testament to insert some of the Gnostic Gospels, and like the Thunder Perfect Mind and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and so on, into the New Testament, and that I have been dipping in and out of since I read this. So if you're interested in sort of a more female-centered Christian perspective, this is something I would recommend. But if that's not something you'd be into, you would not enjoy this. Okay. Another non-fiction book I've really enjoyed this year is Stephen King's memoir on writing. Now, the funny thing about this is I've actually never read a Stephen King book in my life. So I didn't pick this up because I'm such a Stephen King fan. It's more, somebody bought this for me actually as a gift because I'm interested in writing, the craft of writing. I really enjoyed reading this, and it has made me want to go and read some actual Stephen King fiction. The first part of the book is biographical, so it starts off telling you about like how he got started in writing, and there's stuff about his experience of addiction, and he was in a very bad car accident, or he was hit by a car, and it talks about that as well. So if you're interested in Stephen King, and you want to know more about him as a person, the first half of this is really interesting, and of course it's well written, and engaging and entertaining to read. And then the second part is all about his approach to the craft of writing, and it gets into real nitty gritty bits, like, he hates adverbs, like that kind of thing, and about his approach to craft. Like, he's one of those people who sits down and writes every single day, and as a result is incredibly prolific as a writer. I really enjoyed this. Once I got into it, I just I couldn't put it down, and I found it really, really interesting. So if you're interested in the craft of writing, this is highly recommended. And then fiction. So that was 3 non-fiction in my top 5. The fiction books that I especially enjoyed this year are, first one would be The Book of Dust by the Volume 1, La Belle Sauvage by Philip Pullman. And I have to say, it feels a wee bit like cheating to include an audiobook. This was the first year I have ever read read audiobooks. I decided I wanted to shift away from just listening to the news all the time on my commute. And I bought a couple of audiobooks on CD to listen to in my car. I'm going to have to figure out a more technologically efficient way of streaming or downloading audiobooks digitally in a format that I can play in my car, because I don't have Bluetooth. But anyway, that's a story for another time. I got this one on CD, and this is narrated by Michael Sheen, who is, I'm sure you're familiar with as an actor. He has done a fantastic job on this. It is brilliant. I enjoyed his narration so much that I did buy the second in the series, which is also narrated by him, and I'm assuming he will narrate the third when it eventually comes out. And I think rather than buy the physical book, I will probably try to get the audiobook of it too, because I've enjoyed his telling of this story so well. So if you're familiar with the trilogy His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, this is a prequel to that story. So this book centers on Lyra, but she is a baby, and so she's not the main character. But the story is fabulous, and the fantasy elements of the story and the world that's created. I think if you're already familiar with the world from Northern Lights, then that's probably helpful. But you wouldn't necessarily have to have read the whole trilogy to understand this book, because this is a prequel. And then the second book in the series, The Secret Commonwealth, that then is a sequel to the Dark Materials trilogy. But this is great. It's a standalone story. I really, really enjoyed it. So La Belle Sauvage by Philip Pullman, highly recommended. And the fifth book in my top 5 fiction books is The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which I don't have because I have loaned it to someone. But that is a novel that was published either this or last year, but actually was originally written in the 1990s, and it's been translated from the Japanese into English finally this year. And it is a kind of a mixture of dystopian fiction and a kind of magical realist fiction. And it's very strange. The Memory Police, it's about people's memories are taken away or disappear because of this kind of dictatorial dystopian government they have on this island. It's very mysterious and doesn't fully explain itself, which is where it sort of gets into this magical realism territory. But it also has a lot of the sort of tropes of dystopian fiction to do with people's compliance and passivity in face of really very unreasonable regulations. And yeah, I found it a very powerful read, and I really enjoyed it. But I have loaned it to someone, which is why I don't have it anymore. But hopefully I'll get it back, because it was one I really particularly did enjoy this year. So that was my top 5. I have a few honourable mentions. An honourable mention in the fiction is this book, The World Breaker by L.M.R. Clark. So this is the third book in a trilogy. The trilogy is called Arc of the Sky, and these are the first 2 in the series. So I'd read these, must have been last year, and then the third volume, The World Breaker, came out this year. So it's sort of honourable mention because I really need to kind of mention the whole trilogy. So full disclosure, L.M.R. Clark is a personal friend of mine in real life, and I'm so proud of them and their achievement in writing this trilogy. They're already working on another duology series. This one in particular, this series, so The Moon Rogue is the first one, if you were interested in checking it out, and it's published by Castrum Press, and I think is available on like Amazon and so on. This series is set in a kind of a fantasy world, as I'm sure you can kind of pick up from the cover. So it's a great series if you're into kind of alternate worlds and that sort of world building. The characters are not human; they're kind of a semi-reptilian characters. It's but they operate very in a very recognizable way. The world building in terms of the religious systems, the gods and goddesses, the political systems, the power plays, the politics, is incredibly detailed. And the story basically centers on a prince who is supplanted by his brother, and then the brother has kind of harnessed the power of a dark goddess to support his kind of power and control, and then his empire building and so on. And the brother that has been supplanted, he kind of the trilogy explores his eventual partnering with the female main character, who is able to harness for him the power of the light goddess to try to supplant his brother again, and regain control of the empire and so on. So that's kind of the political overarching plot. But the detail in terms of the character and the relationships and the magic and everything about this world, it's just really intriguing and makes you want to keep reading and find out what happens. So if you're into fantasy, this is a great series. The other thing that might draw you to this series is the LGBTQ plus representation within the series. The writer is a non-binary and has been very purposeful in ensuring that the landscape of this series is one in which the characters present a variety of sort of the LGBTQ plus spectrum, and that their characters, their relationships are integrated into the narrative in a very just kind of integral way. Like the main character, the main female character, for example, is an asexual, aromantic character. The main male character that I mentioned, the prince, he's gay. The brother is in a bisexual, polyamorous relationship. Like there's just a whole variety of relationships presented, and it's just really wonderfully done. So highly recommend this is the one I read this year, The World Breaker, but the first one, if you want to check it out, is The Moon Rogue by Ella M.R. Clarke, and that's the Arc of the Sky trilogy. So just like how they look all together. And the sort of honourable mention of my favourite tarot book of the year is Your Tarot Court by Ethany Dawn. This is a fabulous book, and particularly, if you're watching this and you're somebody who struggles with the court cards and tarot, I mean, this book is really, it really spells it out in a really helpful way. It covers lots of different areas. The part that I think I got the most out of is this sort of archetypes in the tarot court, this longest chapter. And then she goes back through the tarot court archetypes in relation to love, and love readings particularly, and there's an extended exercise in mapping the tarot court against pop culture characters, so like characters from fiction and things like that help you to remember the court cards. So you go through the process of sort of understanding, for example, that I believe it's the healer archetype that she associates with the Queen of Cups, and then, for example, she takes that into pop culture and talks about, Dr. Quinn, medicine woman, as being a good archetype of the Queen of Cups. And I think for me, I had chosen Sam Beckett from Quantum Leap as my Queen of Cups. And, so that sort of process really helps you to remember the sort of energies of the cards, and she uncouples those energies and archetypes from gender, and really puts it in a contemporary setting in a way that's easy to understand and easy to apply to reading for somebody in a modern context. So highly recommended this book. I really, really enjoyed it. And finally, one last honourable mention. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I have read so many children's books this year and read them ad nauseum again and again and again and again. And I actually made a list on Goodreads of all of her books, and I think I had something like 85 books of hers that, all of which have been read multiple times. But one really special book, and I'm going to have to lift the camera to show it to you. One really special book that we were given, I think, as a present last Christmas is this beautiful book, The Lost Words by Robert McFarlane and Jackie Morris. So this is a really big book, if you can see there, like, I mean, that's my hand. It's a huge big book, and it is an absolutely gorgeous artistic and poetry combination. So it's about words that were removed from the Oxford Children's English Dictionary, and I'll see if I can find you an example of one. So here's bluebell. So you have a double page spread where you can find the word in amongst all these other letters, and then when you turn the page you have a poem, and they're all acrostic poems. So the first letter of each line is, spells the word down the side, and then you have a beautiful illustration of the thing that's been described, so plants and animals, and then you have another gorgeous 2-page illustration of that plant or animal. So, I mean, it's just gorgeous, and I've read this book to my daughter, and I've just read it myself as well, dipping in and out of it, because it is just, I mean, it's a work of art. So if you're interested in animals, in plants, in poetry, in art, this book, The Lost Words by Robert McFarlane and Jackie Morris, is just gorgeous. And if you have a child, it's a lovely book to explore with children, but I mean, it's just a lovely book, full stop, for everyone. Okay, so there was a few more than 5. If you saw my tarot top 5, you'll not be surprised. But my top recommendations, or my top reads of the year then. So if you've watched this whole video, I thank you, and I'd love to hear what your top reads of 2020 were as well. I'm going to continue in 2021 to try to read the rest of the books that I still have sitting around that aren't read, but I think I would like to read a bit more fiction this year. So if you have any great fiction recommendations, I would love to hear below, because I'm going to let myself buy or borrow a few more books this year to check out some new titles as well. So thanks for watching, and yeah, there'll be more tarot content coming soon. Bye.